Okay, so this is our data science pipeline, homework 3. Our team consisted of Breanna Johnson, Leonardo Costa, and myself, Stephen Highland. So the problem we wanted to analyze was the relationship between restaurant rankings and average household incomes. So we took a list of the top 100 restaurants in the world and another list that has the average monthly net salary after tax of every city in the world. And we analyzed these in a few different ways. And here are the websites that we scraped for these lists. So here's our code. Sorry, here's the website that we used. This is the one for the top 100 restaurants, as you can see. And like these change, but since they're scraped, every time we run the code, they'll be updated along with the rankings. So these include columns of the name of the restaurant, the city, and the chef, as well as the ranking. And over here we have the rankings of the cities by average monthly salary. So obviously there's going to be way too many cities here that are not included in our 100 restaurants list. So we wanted to narrow this down and only include those that were included in the restaurant list.
So here are some of the important packages that we use for this project. So HTML, Beautiful Soup, and requests were used for scraping the websites. And then the SQL Alchemy was used for pushing it to a database, which you use the SQLite. And then we also use the NP, PLT, and PD, which are pandas for the data frame. So here, as you can see, we have the first scraping of the first website. So this is the URL that we use for that website, and we just requested access, and we scraped the website in HTML, and then we just printed it out here with Prettify so that we can further analyze the section blocks. And so from those section blocks, the information that we obtained was the block of the names, which was like three strings. One was the restaurant name, one was the location, and the other was the chef's name. And the other block was the current position, which had the pound sign and the actual position in string and numerical value, and also the position from other years, but we didn't really take that into consideration. So we just took the number from that. And here, as you can see, we use the 3xpath command line to take that, and those are the classes that we got from it.
So now getting to data transformations, we previously imported the restaurants, locations, and all these, and now we want to separate the cities and countries in the locations, and we do this by using this for loop. So we have the locations have both the cities and countries in one line, and we want to split those into two separate lists at the comma, which is what separates the two. And down here, we want to change the ranking into float values instead of string values for easier data analysis. So we use another for loop to pretty simply just turn them into floats. And finally, we create a data frame using these new lists of restaurant names, cities, countries, the chef's name, and the ranking using pandas. And here is some values from this new data frame. So now we are into scraping the second website. So it's the same process as before with the restaurants, but now the URL is changed. And this is to get the list of the average monthly salaries. So down here into data generation, it's the same process as before, except now we have lists instead of blocks, and makes it easier to actually separate. And the data transformation is essentially the same, using for loops to separate the cities and countries and turning the values, the number, like the average salaries, into floats. And this results in a data frame of 439 rows and 3 columns. So clearly this is far more cities than we have in our restaurant list, but we further down here start messing with these things.
All right, now that we have our two data frames, we kept going to the database integration. One quick observation that we should make is that the second data frame, composed of the cities, the countries, and the average salary, has no specific organization. As you can see, the values fluctuate, and that's because the HTML parsing in the website had the same sort of organization as this one, which is very randomized, and at the end, they stored the values, and so that's what we're going to do in the next few cells, as you can see. So for database integration, what we did is using the engine, we created an SQLite, which is just it holds the database at memory of the computer. And since we don't have a lot of data, that is okay for this project. And these two commands down here just show us pushing the first data frame and the second data frame to the database. And so we just wrote this fast query here that uses the cities of both the data frames to join both data frames inside the database so that we can access the overlap of cities between the two. And then here we just read from the database the overlap that I just mentioned, and we created a new database with assorted values from the average salary in ascending order. And so here is the data frame that came from the joint database, or the joint data frames that we just spoke about.
So onto data analysis, we wanted to find if there was any correlation between restaurant ranking and the average salary per city. And we use matplotlib to and the data frames, the rankings and the average salary, to create this graph. And normally you'd expect a linear downward sloping line from the ranking versus the average salary. Obviously the number one would be highest, but as you can see, there's really no correlation between any of these data points. And further down here, we go into the summary stats of each data set. So for this first one, we have just a brief overview of the top, the frequency of each of some of the cities and the countries and the chefs. Here's just some standard statistical analysis of other data sets. And down here, we just covered the top 5 most frequent cities that were in our data frame and their corresponding average salaries. And one key takeaway is that 3 out of the 5 are actually located in the US, and almost all of them are actually above the average salary of the combined list of cities.